Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 4th September 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us look at some of the articles that are important for us from the exam point of view. And let us start this discussion. Now, this article on page number 6 has been written by the former Vice President of India, and it mainly highlights the importance of question hour in the parliamentary proceedings. Now, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we note that the government of India has done away with the question hour in the upcoming monsoon session. And this move of the government was widely opposed by the members of opposition party. So, in this context, this article highlights the importance of the question hour in the parliamentary proceedings and also how does the dropping of the question hour in the parliamentary proceedings impact the accountability of the government to the legislature. So, this will be an important part for us from the General Studies Paper 2 point of view under the topic Constitution and Polity. Now, before discussing, let us look at the basics of question hour and the zero hour in the parliamentary proceedings. And after that, let us look at the issues that have been analyzed by the author. Now, regarding the parliamentary proceeding, you should note that the first hour of every sitting of the parliament is generally reserved for asking and answering of the questions by the members of opposition party as well as the members of the ruling party. And this hour is known as the question hour, in which the questions are asked to the government of the day. Now, this parliamentary question is a technique of parliamentary surveillance or oversight over the functioning of the government. And through these questions, the members of the parliament hold the government of the day accountable. Now, the members of the parliament are free to ask questions on matters of public importance and on those matters which are a cause of concern for the general public from the ministers of the government. And in this case, the members of the government are bound to answer every question that has been asked in the question hour. So basically, because of this foundation, it holds the government of the day accountable. Now, besides holding the government accountable, these questions also enable the ministers and the government of day to gauge the popular reaction related to the policy and the administration of the government. That is, it is a feedback mechanism for the policies of the government. So the only requirement regarding the questions is that unless the speaker otherwise directs, not less than 15 days notice of a question shall be given. That is, notice of the question has to be given 15 days in advance. Further, if a member of the parliament desires that his question should be answered orally, then he has to distinguish his question with an asterisk mark, and that is known as the star mark question. And if the member does not distinguish it by an asterisk or a star mark, the question shall be placed on the list of questions for written answers. That is, for such kind of questions, the government will reply in written answers. So basically, star mark questions are those questions for which the answers will be orally given in the parliament, while the non-starred questions are those questions for which the answers will be given in a written format. Now, besides question hour, another important instrument of parliamentary proceeding is the zero hour. And this zero hour starts immediately after the question hour, and accordingly this has been known as the zero hour because it starts around 12 noon. Now, unlike the question hour, the zero hour is not mentioned in the rules of procedure, and accordingly it is an informal device which is available to the members of the parliament to raise matters without any prior notice. Now, this zero hour has gained importance because of the support it receives from the citizens, media, MPs, and the presiding officers, despite not being a part of the rules of procedure or the rule book of the parliament. So, accordingly, zero hour is also one of the important instruments of parliamentary democracy which holds the government of the day accountable. And it is important because it is an informal instrument which does not require any prior notice. So it is different from the question hour in the sense that no prior notice is required. And also, it is not mentioned in the rules of procedure, and India has not borrowed this instrument from other parliamentary democracies, and it is an Indian innovation. So now what kind of questions can be asked in the parliament during the question hour? So these mainly include the starred questions, unstarred questions, short notice questions and the questions that are addressed to the private members. Now regarding the starred questions, as we have learned that these are those questions for which the member desires an oral answer in the house, and this is distinguished by an asterisk mark or a star. Further supplementary questions can be asked related to these starred questions. Regarding the unstarred questions, these are those questions for which the member requires or desires a written answer. Now, besides these starred questions, a short notice question relates to a matter of urgent public importance, and it can be asked with shorter notice than the period of notice that has been prescribed for an ordinary question. Besides, like a starred question, it is answered orally and also it's followed by supplementary questions. So, the only difference between a short notice question and a normal question is that the notice period for the short notice question is less as compared to an ordinary question. And finally, there are questions that are addressed to the private members. And these are asked when the subject matter pertains to any bill, resolution, or any matter relating to the business of the House for which that member is responsible. So basically, this is related to the questions that have been asked to the private members of the parliament. So, for example, if a private member has introduced a bill in the parliament, so in that case, questions can be addressed to that private member regarding that private member's bill. So these are the type of questions that are generally asked in the parliament in the question hour. Now, parliament is one of the most important chapters for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And as you can see, a lot of questions have been asked from the instruments of parliamentary proceedings. So for example, this question that was asked in the year 2017 was related to the instruments of parliamentary proceedings. Also, this question that was asked in 2014 was related to no confidence motion. And finally, this question that was asked in 2015 was related to the principle of parliamentary democracy. So this question that was asked in 2017 reads, the Parliament of India exercises control over the functions of the Council of Ministers through. So basically, the Parliament exercises control through all these instruments, that is the adjournment motion, the question hour and supplementary questions. And in this case, the correct answer was D. Further, the question that was asked in 2015 reads, there is a parliamentary system of government in India because, and this is because the Council of Ministers are responsible to the Lok Sabha. Further, the question that was asked in 2014 reads, consider the following statements regarding a no confidence motion in India. First is that there is no mention of a no confidence motion in the Constitution of India, and secondly, a motion of no confidence can be introduced in Lok Sabha only. Now we note that there is no mention of no confidence motion in the Constitution, and hence this statement is correct. Further, we note that the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, and hence a motion of no confidence can be introduced in the Lok Sabha only. So the correct answer is C, both 1 and 2. So as we have seen, a lot of questions have been asked regarding the responsibility of the government to the Lok Sabha and also the instruments of parliamentary proceedings which hold the government accountable. And accordingly, the chapter on Parliament of India becomes very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view in the Constitution and Polity section. So do prepare it well before the upcoming preliminary examination. Now, after looking at the basics of the question hour and the 0 hour and the importance of the parliamentary proceedings for our examination point of view, let us look at the importance of question hour from the accountability and the transparency point of view that have been highlighted by the former Vice President of India. So in this regard, the author has said that the accountability through the question hour is very critical for the parliamentary proceeding. And this is on the account of the regularity through which these questions are asked and also the availability of the question hour on the basis of equality to every member of the House, Rajya Sabha or even the Lok Sabha. So basically it provides equality to the members of both the houses of the parliament, that is Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, where they can ask questions to the government of the day. Also, the questions are asked on a regular basis and accordingly they are very important and critical for holding the government accountable. Secondly, the question hour has a special significance in the parliamentary proceeding because it covers every aspect of the government activity. So it includes both the domestic as well as the foreign policy aspects of the government, and in this, the members of the parliament can hold the government accountable on both the domestic as well as foreign policy fronts. Further, through the questions that are asked in the question hour, the government can analyze the feedback on its policies. And also, such questions give the public a view of the performance of both its elected representatives and also of the ministers. Further, the scope of inaccuracies in such answers is minimal because the rules provide that there can be correction of the inaccuracies by the answers that are provided by the ministers concerned. Also, copies of such answers are given and are available to the members at the notice office before the start of day's proceedings, and also they are available on the websites. Further, the questions which are asked during the question hour are in general to the point and very specific to the issues concerned. Further, the answers that have been provided to the questions that have been asked in the question hours have led to lot of debates and inquiries on the government's performance, and accordingly, they have been very crucial in holding the government accountable. Now, besides holding the government accountable, the question hour also provides the government of the day an opportunity to explain their position on any issue both to the member concerned and also to the public in general. Further, if the answers that are provided by the government are not satisfactory, then it leads to protest by the members of opposition. So basically, the question hour makes the government of the day accountable, and it also helps in making the functioning of the government transparent in nature. Now, as we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the lifestyles across the globe, and accordingly, even the legislatures across the world have adopted to this new form of life. And in this manner, they have devised new devices for holding the government accountable and for their proceedings. So the author says that despite the new adaptations due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the system of accountability cannot be erased from our democratic functioning, and especially in the functioning of the parliamentary form of government. So in this context, the deletion of the question hour from the parliamentary proceedings is suspect on behalf of the government of the day because it is aimed at avoiding the scrutiny by the members of parliament. And also this has been seen as curtailment of the right to question the government. So in this background, after a lot of opposition, the government has clarified that the unstarred questions will continue to be received and answered, and change will relate only to the starred marked questions which are answered orally in the parliament. Now, the importance of the star marked questions as compared to the unstar marked questions is that the star marked questions explore the intent and the alleged illegality or procedural lacuna that the government's decision in the question has sought to cover up in the form of words and expressions that are used in the written answers. So, in the unstarred questions, the government can cover up its illegality or other issues through use of various forms of words and expressions. However, it cannot be done in the starred marked questions because it helps in exploring the intent of the government. So in this background, the author says that the government must have explored other alternatives before removing the question hour from the agenda of parliamentary business. And he has said so because of the importance of the question hour in holding the government accountable, and that is the essence of the parliamentary democracy. So these are few aspects related to the issue of dropping of the question hour. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 7 is again related to the debate of increasing the age of marriage for women to 21 years from the current 18 years. Now, we have already discussed this issue regarding the increasing the age of marriage for women in the DNS of 21st August 2020. And in that video, we have looked at some of the arguments in favor and against the increase in age of marriage. So what we will do is that we will revise from that video some of the arguments in favor of increasing the age of marriage for women and also the arguments against the increase in age of marriage. However, we will also look at some of the arguments that have been forwarded in this article against the increase in age of marriage for women. So basically, we will club the arguments that we had already discussed in the 21st August DNS and also the arguments that are provided in the present article. So this will be an important part for us from General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic social issues and social justice. So first let us look at the arguments that are forwarded in favor of increasing the marriageable age for women or girls. Now accordingly, the first argument is related to the issue of gender neutrality. And accordingly, the Articles 14 and the Article 21 of the Constitution guarantee the right to equality and right to live with dignity. And both these rights are violated by having different legal ages for men and women to marry. And we note that the legal age for marrying for women is 18 years in India, and for the men it is about 21 years. So, in this regard, the International Treaty Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women calls for the abolition of laws that prescribe different marriageable age for men and women. And they argue that such differentiation assumes that women have a different physical or intellectual rate of growth as compared to men. However, in this regard, the Commission has recommended that the minimum age of marriage for both the genders, that is, men and women, must be set at 18 years. Further, the Law Commission of India, in a consultation paper, has argued that having different legal standards contributes to stereotypes that wives must be younger than their husbands, and accordingly, the legal age of marriage for both men and women should be same, and there should not be different legal ages. Further, the women rights activists have argued that having different legal ages perpetuates the stereotype that women are more mature than men of the same age, and therefore they can be allowed to marry sooner. So this means that the argument for having lower marriageable age for women will further perpetuate the stereotype that the women can be married earlier. The other arguments for increasing the marriageable age are that early pregnancy is normally associated with increased child mortality rates as it affects adversely the health of the mother. And accordingly, by increasing the marriageable age for girls, the early pregnancy would be avoided and it can help in reducing the child mortality rates. Further, according to a report published by the United Nations Population Fund, it has said that the child marriages were most universally banned. However, these are happening at a rate of 33,000 child marriages a day. Further, according to UNICEF, at least 1.5 million girls under the age of 18 are married in India, and nearly 16% of the adolescent girls which are aged between the 15 to 19 age bracket are currently married. So accordingly, these are also some of the arguments for increasing the marriageable age for girls in India, because child marriage is highly prevalent in India. So regarding the arguments in favor of increasing the marriageable age for girls, it includes the issue of gender neutrality. It also includes the argument for improving the health condition of women, and also increasing the marriageable age so that the child marriage can be reduced. Now, the minimum age of marriage for men and women have been provided in order to discourage and declare illegal the events of child marriage, which is one of the social ills that is prevalent in the Indian society. So in this background, let us look at the provisions of the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006. Now, this act sets the minimum age of marriage at 18 years for women and 21 years for men. Now, this act treats the underage marriages as valid, however, they are voidable in nature. So, this means that an underage marriage is valid as long as the minors that are involved in the marriage want it to remain valid. Also, this act treats those underage marriages as void or having no legal validity where there have been instances of trafficking, enticement, fraud, or deceit. So, basically, under this PCMA Act, all those marriages which have been conducted through trafficking, fraud, or deceit can be declared void or illegal. Besides these, this act provides the minor parties to nullify the marriage up till 2 years of attaining the majority. Also, there is a provision of stopping an underage marriage from happening, and this helps the social workers in providing flexibility in negotiating with the families that are involved and in getting the help of district administration, child protection agencies, as well as the police. So basically, it is because of this provision in the Prevention or Prohibition of Child Marriage Act that the social workers can negotiate with the families and also can get the help of district administration and police to stop the events of child marriage. So basically, we see that this Prohibition of Child Marriage Act does not declare all the marriages which are below 18 years or 21 years of age as illegal, and it treats these underage marriages as valid. However, they can be declared void in future if they are based on trafficking, enticement, fraud, or deceit, and also if the minor parties want this marriage to be nullified. So, after this, let us look at the arguments that have been forwarded against increasing the marriageable age for women. So, in this context, the authors have said that it is important that the girls are not pushed into marriage early, and that the marriage should not be compulsory for them to gain social or economic status. However, an increase in the minimum age of marriage to 21 years will still be counterproductive to the cause of women empowerment. And why is it so? Because minimum age of marriage does not mean mandatory age. It only signifies that below that age there could be criminal prosecution under the child marriage law. Now, the increase in the marriageable age of the girls further increases the parental control over the girls in India. And it is said that to increase the age of marriage to 21 years would mean that girls will have no say in their personal matters until they attain an age of 21 years. And why is it so? Because the law of prevention of child marriage has been used by parents against daughters who are eloping, and it has become a tool of parental control and for the punishment of boys or men whom girls choose as their husbands. So, most of the cases that are taken to the court are self arranged marriages, and that is because they are generally conducted against the will of the parents. Further, this has been used as a mechanism to annul the marriages in Indian society. And accordingly, only one third of the cases related to the arranged marriages are brought in front of court. And these are brought by the parents or the husbands to dissolve or to nullify the marriages that have been broken down because of domestic violence, dowry, or compatibility issues. So it is said that the issue of age in the marriage is not in the mind of public at large. And this is because it is used in cases of arranged marriages only in one third of the cases of arranged marriages. And in cases where the marriages are self arranged against the will of the parents, it is used to annul the marriage and to increase the parental control further. So basically, the rights that are available to the children under the Rights Convention, which gives the minors the right to be heard and the right for their views to be considered, will be denied to the girls in India right up to the age of 21 years, right beyond their adulthood. Now, regarding the equality argument, that is, the marriageable age of men and women should be equal, the authors say that obviously the equality demands that the age of marriage should be uniform for men and women. However, instead of increasing the marriageable age of women to 21, the minimum age of men should further be reduced. And why is it so? And it is because the right to vote and to enter into the contracts have been given to those people who attain the age of 18, and they are equal for both men and women. And accordingly, the marriageable age should also be reduced to the 18 years of age both for men and women. Also, there is a need to change the minimum age of sexual consent. And in this case, the authors say that in elopement cases, boys are prosecuted for repeated rape of minor wife. And such acts are punishable by a minimum of 20 years of jail term under the Protection of Child from the Sexual Offences Act or the POCSO Act. So now the issue here is that the marriages below the age of 18 can still be valid under the Prevention of Child Marriage Act. However, the sexual activity that takes place in such kind of marriages can be treated as rape under the POCSO Act. So basically, there is a need for changing the minimum age for sexual consent. Now we'll listen to this argument that if the marriageable age of women or girls is increased, it will lead to improvement in the nutritional status of the mother. However, the authors have argued that delaying the age of pregnancy is the weakest factor in the nutritional status of the mother, and hence the increase in the marriageable age of girls is unlikely to have any impact on the nutritional status of mother, and this is because the nutritional status of women or mother depends on various other factors and not just on the age of marriage or pregnancy. Secondly, India's fertility rates have been declining to below replacement levels in many states. And this declining fertility level has also been witnessed in those states which have higher levels of child marriage. So the argument that increasing the marriageable age of women will lead to population control is also flawed according to the authors. Further, the authors argue that the change will leave vast majority of Indian women who marry before age of 21 without legal protection. And further, the authors say that if the reason for increasing the marriageable age of women is the gender equality issue, that is, there should not be differential age of marriage for both men and women, then India should follow the global norms of 18 years for both men and women for their marriageable ages. And while concluding, the authors have said that there is no direct data which suggests that increasing the age of women will automatically and substantially improve the nutritional status of women or will lead to population control. And accordingly, the government's move for increasing the marriageable age of the girls should be calculated and based on proper data analysis. So these are few arguments in favor of and against the increasing of marriageable age for girls. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, in this article on page number 1, General Bipin Rawat, who is also the Chief of Defence Staff, has said that as far as the quadrilateral security dialogue is concerned, he feels that it is a good arrangement and it will ensure that in the Indian Ocean region there is complete freedom of navigation without the fear of any other nation singularly trying to dominate the oceans. And this quadrilateral system ensures freedom of navigation and freedom of navigation operations in Indian Ocean and other oceans. And he has said so in a webinar organized by the United States India Strategic Partnership Forum. So in this background, let us look at the quadrilateral security dialogue, which can be important for us from the upcoming preliminary examination point of view, and it can be important in the current events of national and international importance. Now, if you look at the previous year question papers, you will find that questions have been asked related to important groupings and cooperation initiatives. For example, this question was asked in the year 2015, and again, this question was also asked in the year 2015. The first question reads, India is a member of which of the following? So this was regarding the membership of India in some of the important cooperation initiatives. So you could have answered this question easily if you knew that India is not a member of Association of Southeast Asian Nations or the ASEAN. And accordingly, you can eliminate the options A and C. And the only correct answer that comes out is 3 only, because we already know that India is a member of the East Asia Summit. Secondly, if you look at this question in the Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, an initiative of 6 countries, which of the following is or are not a participant or the participants? In this, you have to identify the countries which are not participants. So accordingly, we note that Bangladesh and China are not the participants in the Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, and the correct answer is C, 1 and 3 only. So as we have seen that questions are asked in the preliminary examination related to important international cooperation initiatives, let us look at this quadrilateral security dialogue. So it is considered as an informal grouping among India, Japan, Australia and United States of America. And it aims to support a free, open and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Further, all these 4 nations find a common ground of being the democratic nations and common interests of unhindered maritime trade and security. Further, the group has been formed in reaction to China's emergence as a great power and the fear of China's growing unilateralism through its Belt Road Initiative and expansion in the South China Sea, and also the skirmishes along the line of actual control with India and other countries. And this has driven all these 4 powers to consider banding together in the form of a collective security arrangement. Now, this quadrilateral security dialogue was first held in the year 2007, but it was discontinued in the 2008. However, it was again revived in the year 2017, and in this, India, United States of America, Japan and Australia participated. And in the background of COVID-19 pandemic, when China is asserting itself on different fronts, this quadrilateral security dialogue can become important in the future for countering the increasing influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region. So accordingly, this will be very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now in today's newspaper, there are 2 references from the previous DNS videos. The first one is on page number 6, and that is related to the recently launched National Digital Health Mission by the Prime Minister of India on the Independence Day. And in the Daily News Simplified of 28th August 2020, we have already discussed the various issues that affect the India's primary health ecosystem and how the digital health ID will have shortfalls in achieving the goal of universal primary health care in India. So do go through this DNS video to understand the issues in the primary health ecosystem of India. Now this editorial on page number 6 is related to the telecom sector and related to the adjusted gross revenue that impacts the telecom sector. And we have discussed this issue in detail in the Daily News Simplified of 2nd September 2020. So do go through this video to understand the details of this issue. So with this we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for you.